Let's take a look here at 15C, economic categories of activity and how we can measure the economy. We'll talk first about how we can measure economies here. There are three big measures to be concerned with: GDP, GNP, and GNI. GDP simply represents the total value of all final goods and services produced within a country. So by that we mean a calculator in this case would be a final good, but the silicone and parts and metal going into that, making that calculator would not count for that. So we are looking at final goods, and we're looking at how much exactly all those final goods are worth. So the value of all cars, plus calculators, plus chairs, plus haircuts, plus every economic activity we have, we add that all together within a country to make GDP. For GNP, we look at the total goods and services produced by the citizens of a country, whether at home or abroad. So fairly similar to GDP, but it also takes into account work done by citizens outside your country. So for example, if Toyota opens up a plant in the south and staffs that plant with Japanese workers, the final value of those cars actually gets added to Japan's GNP to help them out because they're produced by Japanese citizens. And the final measure, which is similar to GNP, is gross national income. It is counted almost the same way, but it doesn't include taxes that people pay to their government, because that's kind of dead money that floats around the economy. It doesn't include subsidies or money that the government pays out to businesses to encourage certain behaviors, and it does not include depreciation or the loss of value in a good or service over time. For us, what we'll want to take a look at in particular is GNP, because it really helps us understand just how big economies are and how relatively well off people can be. As we see here, looking through our legend here, more purpley, more darky red colors tell us that an economy does fairly well. In other words, the gross national product divided per person is fairly high. As we get lower on the legend there, we get lower and lower. So as you look around, you can see there are different spots in the world where GNP tends to be higher. That tends to match up fairly well with how developed an economy might be. For example, your four Asian tigers in South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, excuse me, and Singapore see themselves as fairly well developed compared to the rest of Asia. You see places like Western Europe and the United States and Canada also in the same boat. We also see less developed countries. Africa here barely has any room to speak of. South America is a little more better off than Africa, but really not really fully represented here on the cartogram. So that's just one method we can look at to measure economies. We can also measure economies internally. So when we look at a recession, for example, we are talking about an economic decline for a sustained period of time, usually 6 months or 2 economic quarters. The most famous examples of recession probably in 2008, 2009 during the Great Recession, when the banking industry and all kinds of housing values fell out and things like that. Depressions are a little bit more prolonged, so rule of thumb is usually a year or more. The Great Depression of the 1930s is a great example of that. We can measure economic activity in the public sector, so all output or all final goods and services produced by the government at all levels. So that would mean military spending, that would mean spending on schools and things like that. We can also look at private sector spending, which is spending done by individuals or businesses, right? So if Microsoft spends money on developing a new Windows platform, that's private spending. If Apple develops new iPhones or produces new iPhones, that is private sector spending. So public sector spending is done by governments, while private sector spending is done by individuals or businesses. And those individuals, businesses, governments all take part in different economic sectors, starting at the bottom and working our way up. The primary sector deals mostly with dealing with natural resources, and you'll see that mostly in less developed countries. They are looking at gathering raw materials or mining. They're gathering plants or animals in forestry and fishing and hunting, or they're looking at agriculture. Relatively speaking, the U.S. portion in this sector is fairly small. About 3% of our GDP is related there. Moving up the ladder to the secondary sector, we are looking at adding value to those raw materials. So whether it's manufacturing, machining, construction, pretty much taking these inputs and making something with them is the secondary sector. That manufacturing makes up about 25% of our economy. A level above that consists of services, the tertiary sector. If you are engaging in the tertiary sector, you're providing services like haircuts, like the gas station clerk, like an auto mechanic, like a doctor, like someone that does something for you is a member of the tertiary sector, or someone that you pay to do something for you is a member of the tertiary sector. That makes about 2/3 of our economy and includes a lot of what the public sector does. So when the government, for example, provides social security services, or you consult the government and work with taxes and things like that, that falls into the tertiary sector as well. And we also have the quaternary sector, which relies mostly on information. So research and development, things like that, things that are real sciencey, looking at IT services, things that help support what happens down below. We would call those more higher level activities and part of the quaternary sector. Outside of that, and what the government is most responsible for, is providing a framework for all that economic activity to happen, and that is done by providing both transportation and utilities. All right. So while it's only about 5% of the U.S. GDP, you can't really do anything here or here without the government or some entity providing transportation, roads, railroads, airplanes, or anything else to get things from place to place. Also, you have utilities, which can sometimes be private, but usually regulated by the government, things like electricity, natural gas, and things of the sort that businesses need to function. And so they kind of exist outside the pyramid here, but they are very important to the economic activity. We'll go ahead and pause here. That's as much as I need you to know about 15C. Go ahead and take what notes you need, and then go ahead and work on the guided reader.